am here with Nathan J. Robinson, the editor-in-chief of Current Affairs magazine, and we are in the wet oven of New Orleans.
New Orleans, Louisiana. Beautiful Crescent City.
Current Affairs headquarters.
World headquarters.
That's right, world headquarters. And we're here today because you recently wrote an article about the Obama boys, namely David Litt, Dan Pfeiffer, and Ben Rhodes. And, the obvious question is, why would you subject yourself to the immense pain and suffering of reading their memoirs?
Well, I mean, there were parts that I enjoyed the reading of their memoirs because I think I got a lot out of it. Mm-hmm. So these are three speechwriters for the Obama administration. They all released these books about their time there, and my perspective is that the books are not very good, but I think it's really important. I mean, I've always taken the position that you need to read books that you strongly dislike and disagree with because you get value out of learning. You understand how people think. So it's important for those of us like you and me we're both left critics of the Obama administration in a way, and so we can kind of develop a better understanding of the psychology of the people in the Obama administration, and also really examine our own criticisms of Obama to see if they're fair, to see what was going on the inside.
Hear their response and
it's important to understand these people if we're going to have reasonable disagreement with them.
Tell us about these boys and what it says about Obama that he chose to surround himself with. Like, he could have socked his administration with anyone, and he chose David Litt, Dan Pfeiffer, Ben Rhodes, and a number of other folks.
Yeah, well, so first there's this defense of Obama, and oftentimes a defense of politicians that says, well, they operate under constraint. Right. And so I think it's really important to look at the moments where people have free choices. And one of the free choices you have is who are you going to pick to be around you? Who are you going to pick for your cabinet? But who are you going to pick for the people who you just listen to? And it seems telling to me that, and even kind of strange, that Barack Obama picked, when David Litt says when he joined the speechwriting team, it was entirely young white men. Yes. I don't want to have a kind of identity politics criticism. Yes. It's not, but also this is a lot of young white guys from good schools, and it's a very small sliver of the country crafting the message.
Well, as you say, he could have chosen someone from the labor movement. He could have chosen someone from the black church. He could have chosen someone from the environmental movement.
He could have chosen a woman.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely, but absolutely. But I think. One interesting point, and I'm curious to get your response to this, is he had this entire amazing movement apparatus almost, MoveOn.org and so on. And once he took to office, he dismantled it completely. And there was a real estrangement from people's movements and people's organizing, and I'm wondering what you think that...
Yeah, it's bizarre because, one of the strong criticisms of Obama, there's a really good New Republic article about it, is the dismantling of Organizing for America. Right. He built this big apparatus to get himself elected, and it was phenomenally effective. Right. People were drawn to it by the hundreds of thousands. Right. And then when it came time to govern, it was like the work that the grassroots needed to do had been done. Yeah. So you can all go home. And what that meant was that when it came time to kind of mobilize support for things like the Affordable Care Act, there wasn't this grassroots infrastructure because there's this kind of view of politics that was like politics. Yeah, you have to get elected, but then you get the smart guys from Yale in a room together, and then they do the governing.
Well. And what's so interesting about it is the smart guys from Yale don't seem to have any real dedication to particular policies or progressive politics. And what you described really sounds like a cult of personality and not a political movement. And you pulled this great quote from the opening of David Litt's memoir, where he says, "On January 3, 2008, I pledged my heart and soul to Barack Obama. My transformation was immediate and all-consuming. One moment, I was a typical college senior, barely interested in politics. The next moment, I would have done anything, literally anything, for a freshman senator from Illinois." That's astounding. That's shocking.
It's quite a quote. He says, and asked to describe his appeal, he has another thing where he says Obama spoke like presidents in movies.
Yes.
But one of the telling things about that quote is he says he wasn't really very interested in politics.
Right.
And it's weird how absent political values and political goals are from David Litt's conception of, you know, what do you want to be part of this Obama movement?
Right.
And it really was for these guys. It was about Obama as a guy. He was so magnetic.
Right.
They just fell. Both Pfeiffer and Litt say they kind of fell in love with him. They became obsessed with him. Now they're a little self-deprecating, so it's Litt is kind of making fun of himself.
Kind of jokey,
where he says,
right.
"I was an Obama bot."
But that's a way to insulate himself from criticism. You know, I mean, it's a way to avoid actually engaging with the very real substantive critiques. And they were pretty honest about loving West Wing, and you talk about being a movie president and adoring the guy, and this kind of cult of personality reminds me of Jed Bartlett from The West Wing. And maybe you could talk about how this television show really came to shape a presidency. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, but I don't think it's unwarranted in this context.
It's certainly the case that I think you'd find that, I don't know if it's a majority, but a lot of high up people in the Obama administration had their politics to some substantial degree formed by the West Wing. Yes. It's weird. I mean, David Litt is open about it. He says in college we were obsessed with the show. Even though he says he wasn't very political, obsessed with the West Wing. My colleague, Luke Savage, wrote an article for Current Affairs called How Liberals Fell in Love with the West Wing. And he writes about this kind of West Wing conception of what it means to do politics, which is politics is what happens in the White House. It's a bunch of smart, mostly white guys, right? I mean, all of the top people in the West Wing show, Toby, Josh, Leo, Sam.
The one African American I think in the show is the president's personal assistant, which is just like terrible. I mean, it's just
he's
not
the,
good.
He's the body man, which was true with Obama too. The speechwriting team was white, but Reggie Love, the body man, was black. You have this in the West Wing, this conception that politics is these really well-educated guys who know everything about policy, and they sit down and they figure out the country's problems. Now, they don't have to engage with the public much at all. And David Litt says, he's like, we never saw the consequences of our policies, which made it kind of difficult to motivate ourselves.
Right.
And you're like, well, you could have gone out in the country. There's nothing stopping you from like engaging with community groups. But that's not the way they think about what politics is. And I really do think you see this West Wing view in the way they talk about what they do.
Can you talk about the role of bipartisanship and like getting stuff done and compromise? Because I feel like that's a thread that really, people have been talking about bipartisanship and getting stuff done since before West Wing, granted. But I think it really became romanticized and a part of our cultural fabric in a reinvigorated sort of way as a result of West Wing. So maybe
it might be, or it might be, because there's also the Clinton conception of politics, right? This is, so before the West Wing, you had Bill Clinton coming and saying, we need a better way of doing democratic politics. We need a third way.
But it was dramatized, I think, in a 21st or 20th century, late 20th century sort of way.
No, that's absolutely true, and I think there's this real naivete about the way that this certain kind of, I don't really like the word technocrat because I think people need to understand the technical details of things, but the way that these people who think that the small group of smart people, the way they think about the other side, where you see throughout these memoirs, these guys basically being surprised when it turns out that Republicans are not people who want to sit down and work out the country's problems together. And we have our differences, but we all believe the same things. That's what Barack Obama felt to his core. He said it in his 2004 DNC address. He's like, there is no liberal and conservative America. There's just the United States. So there's this idea that the people who are on the other side don't have different values from me. They have the same values, and we just like misunderstand each other. And if we had more rationality in our politics, we could work it out.
Yeah.
But it's not true, right?
Yes.
They have those people on the other side have a very different conception of what the good is, a very different vision for the world, and they're going to fight you because they think that their conception of the world is good, and you think that yours is good, and
there is something kind of zero-sum about politics. At the same time, I do think that there are interesting cracks and crevices, with like Donald Trump, for instance. It's not clear to me that Hillary Clinton, for instance, would have ever sat down with the North Korean president, And, I don't say this in defense of Donald Trump by any means, but I think that there are odd bedfellows,
Well, I think one important point is that you shouldn't be against sitting down and talking to people and trying to resolve irresolvable conflict.
Right.
And in fact, Bernie Sanders is a very pragmatic politician in this way.
Yes.
You can see this from the Senate Yemen resolution, where he works with Republicans. You have to try and get compromise through. And you often have to accept things that aren't fully what you want in politics.
Sure.
It's more like trying to think about what this game is that you're playing. And is this like we're just all buddies here, or am I trying to figure out like points at which their interest coincides with mine, and points at which it diverges, and I need to put pressure on them.
Right.
And it's kind of remarkable how they didn't think that the Republicans were trying to destroy them.
Yeah.
Like, years... In fact, I think it's... Jim Messina, who was on Obama's 2008 campaign. He talked to a Republican Senate aide in 2008 when they won, and she said, "We're going to fight you on everything." And he said, "Well, that's not what we did with George W. Bush."
Right.
And she said, "We don't care."
Yes.
And he was going, "But why? We did it for you."
Yes.
And they go, "Well, because we don't have to do it for you. Why would we?"
Now I can't remember, but Mitch McConnell's comment about, blocking Merrick Garland was one, but I also remember, right, we want this president to fail, right? That was Mitch McConnell, I don't remember. But at any rate, I think that oftentimes Republicans better grasp the intractable nature of political conflict. But saying the whole paradigm that you described of we're all just buddies and we should try to work together reminds me of because of the current news cycle, reminds me of Beto O'Rourke. You and I have been laughing over the last 12 hours about a Vanity Fair profile, complete puff piece that just came out. Robert O'Rourke, formerly, has just declared that he is running for president, and it's not really clear what he's running on or what qualifies him for the office.
Well, yeah, I think everyone should read this new Vanity Fair profile because it's fascinating as a political profile, because it's all about his personality, his personal background. The amount of time that is spent figuring out what he actually believes is minimal.
Yes.
And that should be strange when we think about it, because politics is about, what are we going to do with the power of government? Right. And Beto's very evasive on this. In fact, he says, I find this stunning. He says, "I'm not running against anything. I'm not running against a party, against any ideas." And you think, well, you're not running against injustice. You're not running. I mean, even Obama wasn't quite like that. Yes. But there's this thing where some candidates, and Kamala Harris doesn't have a policy section on her website, or didn't for a long time, and Beto O'Rourke's new website, it has, I think, 3 sections. One is like jobs, one is donate, and one is shop. And you're like, but what do you want to do?
Yes, and to be clear, the jobs section is jobs being employed by his campaign.
Yeah, do you want to work for Beto?
Not like jobs like how are we going to reinvigorate the economy,
Now, to be clear, of course, Beto does say that, I think it's no secret that the Democratic Party has moved to the left, and there are a number of left policies that are kind of litmus tests. And when he's been asked about things like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal. He's made some positive noises.
Right. But, in the profile in Vanity Fair, he's quite slippery on these issues. He says that he wants to make Medicare part of the healthcare marketplace and eventually move towards a Medicare for All system. But, that initially sounds like a kind of public option. He says he supports the Green New Deal in spirit, but not letter. Or, spirit if not letter.
I love that formulation of I support it in spirit. Because you could do it for pretty much anything.
Yes.
You could go,
Yes.
Well, of course.
Well, that was Dianne Feinstein's. I don't know if you remember.
With the kids, when she talks to the kids.
What were they called? Jackbooted tots?
Yeah.
These were the kids that showed up at her office and implored her to support the Green New Deal. And she said, I'm sorry, but in a decade, we're not going to be able to turn the planet around. I know I'm going to be long gone by then, but
I'm with you in spirit.
Yeah, I'm with you in spirit.
I respect what you do.
Now, ultimately, what was kind of revealing or interesting about the whole Dianne Feinstein incident was ultimately she said she was going to vote present on the piece of legislation. So it seemed to be quite effective. I don't think she anticipated the kind of backlash.
Political pressure really does work.
Yeah.
And if you have to, if you don't think about politics in terms of how do we force people to do, how do we force our elected officials to support a thing by making it in their interest to do it and not in their interest not to do it.
Right.
If you don't think about that, you'll never get it done. One of the remarkable things about the Obama administration is that they kind of, and this is why I doubt he just had political constraints on him the whole time thing, is that they kind of accepted political reality as fixed, by which I mean that, at one point they go like, well, we wanted the public option, but then Joe Lieberman said he opposed the public option and he wouldn't vote for it, so we lost the public option. And you go, well, that's the point at which you're supposed to start twisting arms and going like, well, Joe Lieberman, I hope you've enjoyed your career in the Senate, but I'm the president and I'm going to disown and destroy you if you don't support this policy.
Yeah.
This is what you do.
Well, let me ventriloquize the author of this Vanity Fair piece. Because I got the sense, they grant your point, they would say policies matter, but Donald Trump has a cult of personality, and Beto O'Rourke also has a cult of personality, and maybe what you need in order to beat Donald Trump is a cult of personality. Listen, I think that the leftist critiques of Obama are largely correct, and yet he remains wildly popular. Yeah. Okay? Why is that? Is it just that he's personally extremely likable and his presidency was obviously historic and people just don't care about policy? I mean, that might be a brute, sad truth. Yeah. That people don't care about policy, and you can talk about policy all you want till you're blue in the face, but at the end of the day, if the end goal is defeating Donald Trump, maybe you do need a cult of personality to beat him.
The end goal, though, can't be beating Donald Trump because that's one goal. I mean, I think that's a crucial goal. But if you elect someone, you beat Donald Trump. I mean, I don't doubt. I think there might be some argument that it's the best person to run against Donald Trump would be Barack Obama. However, ultimately, I think that Donald Trump. One of the reasons that people like that arise is because ordinary people's everyday needs are not being met. Right. They're angry. They're dissatisfied. They don't know what's going on. They've seen their communities be destroyed. They've seen that their factories closed down. They can't afford medicine. Those types of things need to actually be addressed. If you might throw Donald Trump out of office, but first off, you're not going to solve those problems, and you might also create room for an even. Hard to think that you could get worse than Donald Trump. But, my friend Ben Studebaker, who runs an excellent political blog, he thinks, now I don't agree with him, but he says that a Beto O'Rourke presidency would be worse than a second term for Trump because he thinks that nothing will happen and it will discredit liberalism, and then you'll get a really hard right person like Dan Crenshaw the next time. Right.
Well, I think there's something to that. The other piece about why the cult of personality approach rather than the policy approach is not the right one is we look at someone like Barack Obama, who only recently was at Rice University, I think, bragging about increasing fossil fuel production, and frankly, there's a bit of an existential threat to the planet. And if we genuinely want to, if humanity doesn't want to, if humanity wants to avoid a whole lot of suffering and horrible awfulness, then I think that we need a genuinely radical, genuinely leftist candidate who is going to take the sort of, extreme and warranted, I think, policy actions on climate change that we need.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's very strange and disturbing to see Barack Obama right now, here in 2019, going, he's wearing a tuxedo and he's in front of all these rich people and he's going, a quote is something like, we expanded fossil fuel use, we're the #1 producer in the world, that was me.
Say thank you. Yes.
And you think, well, wait, I thought you were committed to doing something about climate change. See, those are the moments where you think, where the whole well, he tried so hard and failed defense kind of breaks down.
He didn't have to do that.
He didn't. There are things that he didn't have to do.
He opened up the Arctic for drilling by Shell.
There are plenty of points like that. I mean, I've written about.
We can praise him for the Paris Climate Accords, but at the end of the day, if he genuinely, I have a bit of a hobby horse, and in my more cynical moments, I tend to argue that I think that I respect the Republican position on climate change more than I respect the Democratic position on climate change, because I think that with Republicans, their policies and the actions they take are in parallel, cohere with the words, with their rhetoric. And Democrats, they claim that climate change is a national security threat, an existential threat, but then they do diddly, and it's this incoherence, it's this incompatibility, it's this just position that makes me want to pull all the hair out of my head, because it just feels like they don't really believe what they're saying.
There's an excellent article in Jacobin called "The Democrats Are Climate Deniers"
by my good friend Branko Marcitic.
And he essentially says,
I'm sorry, I messed up his name. It's Marcitic.
Marcitic. He essentially says in that article, if you just say, "Oh yes, it's a problem," but you don't act like it's a problem, then you're denying it's a problem, essentially. Yes. And there's other people who compared it to like a meteor approaching Earth, right? Where it's like, if people go, "Oh yes, of course I care about the meteor," but you're like, yeah, but you're not screaming about it. You're not like making an issue of it. Right. Hillary Clinton would affirm the scientific consensus on climate change. I don't know how much she brought it up in 2016. It wasn't much.
No.
It really, you see, so it's like, do you really take this stuff seriously?
This is where the whole lesser evilism, I mean, listen, if you're going to be voting in a swing state, I understand, based on the kind of Chomskyan line of argumentation, I understand why you'll vote for a Democrat over a Republican. But this is where the lesser evilism, to me, sometimes can be a little bit moot, is that if our country, or, if a country is submerged underwater, okay, I appreciate that you're a member of the Paris. You signed on to the Paris Climate Accords, but there are still people who are drowning because you're not moving as radically as you ought to be.
It really is. There needs to be this understanding that we are in a fight on various things, right? I mean, so you look at, for example, education policy, and Barack Obama, again, this is a moment of complete choice.
Right.
He appoints charterization guy Arne Duncan to his cabinet. They institute this policy called the race to the top, where if your state passes policies favorable to charter schools, you are eligible to fight for this pool of funding. But there is a project on the right to eliminate public schools, to private to the right. If you keep compromising with them, eventually you will go towards what they are after, which is they think public schools are socialism, which there's an argument that they kind of.
Well, it depends what you mean by socialism.
Depends on what you mean by socialism. But they are the sort of thing that demonstrates that public institutions, they are a commonly owned public institution.
They're public, but, I don't know that...
they're not democratic. We can dispute socialism.
Let's leave that aside.
Mushy term. But they want a privatized school system. That's what they want, because they think things work best on the free market. And they won't stop until they get that. So you need to fight them on that, and you need to recognize what they are trying to do. And the same is true. I mean, Ben Rhodes' memoir is really interesting because of mostly because of the passages on Israel, where he says, you know, Benjamin Netanyahu keeps building illegal settlements, and they keep like going, well, why we're giving Israel everything we possibly can, and they're not giving us anything in return. Right. Why not? And you go, because he's gonna keep taking stuff from you. If you don't put any pressure on him, he's not going to do anything for you, because he knows. And Ben Rhodes says, like, we weren't doing anything tangible for the Palestinians.
Well, and what's interesting is that's so at odds with public statements that he's made, which is that we did our best to hold Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel accountable, and we tried to bring pressure to bear onto them. But, that's not what pressure looks like. Pressure looks like, cutting funding for, they received, I mean, depending on the year you're talking, $3.8 billion every year. And they signed the largest aid package in American history, $3.8 billion, $38 billion over a decade. And so if you were genuinely committed to bringing pressure to bear on Israel, that would mean saying, until the settlements cease, that aid package you want so badly, kiss that goodbye.
Yeah.
And that diplomatic immunity that we give you in the United Nations Security Council when they produce resolutions that are condemning the illegal settlements, which we oppose, kiss that diplomatic immunity goodbye. That's what pressure looks like, and we haven't seen even, we haven't seen that on any level.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's worth saying Israel is committing a series of ongoing international crimes.
Right.
The settlements are illegal. They're seizures of land. The murder of children, disabled people, everyone should read the UN report on the Gaza protests where snipers just picked off paramedics.
Well, and there's video of it as well. You can see.
And these things. You have to get serious about them, but what Barack Obama would do, I mean, in 2012, he went in front of AIPAC and he said, our support for Israel is bipartisan, that's how it should stay. At every crucial juncture, we've been there for Israel. Despite a tough budget environment, our security assistance has increased. He said, we will do what it takes to preserve Israel's qualitative military.
Yes.
Now, there's no, if. You go, we will do that if...
Right, there's no contingency, there's no element of condition, and, I mean, this is one of the shocking things about American politics is just how narrow the spectrum of debate on Israel is. Ilhan Omar, there are legitimate critiques of her, undeniably, but she and Bernie Sanders and Rashida Tlaib and others have gone a great way in terms of opening up the spectrum of acceptable public discourse from politicians on Israel. Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership issued a statement following Ilhan Omar's initial tweet about it's all about the Benjamins, saying we support Israel and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I'm closely paraphrasing. And in a statement condemning anti-Semitism, I'm not sure what that one thing has to do with the other. You can be opposed to anti-Semitism and still not unconditionally support Israel. In fact, there's something anti-Semitic about equating unconditional support with
it's true.
Israel.
But it's remarkable that in private, Obama was, they were saying, he was just very frustrated with Netanyahu. But it really is, I want to get back to this conception of politics, where it's like this failure to understand how you get stuff.
Yes.
How you really advance an agenda. So just to wrap this up here, I mean, I do think that, again, I'm trying to avoid saying we were right about everything, because that's obviously not true. Mm-hmm. But I do think that if you look back at left critics of Obama, Adolph Reed, who is always worth reading, said, I mean, he had identified as early as 1996, he was living in Chicago, and in 1996, when Obama first came on the scene, he said that Obama represented the politics of form over substance, and that he was a smooth Harvard lawyer with impeccable do-good credentials and a vacuous to repressive neoliberal politics. And he warned in 2008 that Obama's empty claims to being a candidate of progressive change and to embodying a movement that exists only as a brand will dissolve into disillusionment. And I think that was, I think that showed a lot of foresight, honestly. And Matt Taibbi during the campaign was calling Obama an ingeniously crafted human cipher, an ideological universalist who spends a great deal of rhetorical energy showing that he recognizes the validity of all points of view. And Beto really takes that to the extreme.
Yes.
I mean, he won't even, as you say, call himself a progressive. He's all about, I just want to work things out with it, to the point where he went on this road trip with a Republican congressman and helped get the Republican elected over the Democrat in his race. And I think the conclusion that we have to come to from looking at this Beto-style politics and looking at these memoirs is that you really have to have some serious values, some serious politics. This sounds like very basic.
Yes.
And be willing to fight for them.
Yes. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Nathan J. Robinson, for sitting down with us.
Thank you,
Editor-in-Chief of Current Affairs Magazine. We have an issue of Current Affairs Magazine.
The beautiful, unparalleled.
And you can subscribe for what comes out to $5 a month.
Only $5 a month.
And we have a podcast. You should subscribe to that.
Patreon.com/Current Affairs.
You can follow us on Twitter at Current Affairs.
At Current Affairs.
At Current Affairs. And like us on Facebook. And
go to currentaffairs.org and read all of the articles.
Including the Obama Boys, which Nathan just recently penned.
Deep and substantive.